Welcome, everybody, to a preview edition of All In with Art Stapleton, a New York Giants podcast brought to you by NorthJersey.com and The Record. I'm your host, Art Stapleton. Escape the rain here on Wednesday morning and putting out a Giants-Eagles Thursday night preview show. We had a truncated week over at the Giants, just one day of access. There were Zoom calls with the coordinators and Brian Daboll on Monday. Listened in on those at the airport down in New Orleans, trying to get back home to New York, New Jersey area. And we had one day of access yesterday, no practice viewing. And in terms of where the Giants are at, look, it's pretty simple. It's 4-1 Eagles versus the 1-4 Giants. Before the season, regardless of where the Giants were, you would look at this game and say, boy, the Giants got no shot. They're going to get beat down by the Eagles. They're just not ready to measure up. And anyone who tells you that is lying to you. It tells you that they didn't think that. They're lying to you. So what are you going to do about it? I mean, there is no space, no time for excuses for the New York Giants. You let a game get away on Sunday that you should have won. And I told you last week, as we all knew, the Saints were looking at the Giants just like the Giants were looking at the Saints. They had a rough start to the season. They were winless. Giants got one the week before, and it was, what do we got to do to get this one? And the Giants committing 5 turnovers on 5 straight possessions in a variety of ways really took the momentum away from themselves. And when they talk about, shooting yourself in the foot, the Giants actually shot themselves in the head. And that's ultimately what happened here. And we're talking figuratively, obviously, but when it's a situation where the Giants, you cannot afford to make mistakes. And I know everyone wants to make this week, last week, we're riding the roller coaster again with the New York Giants, and it's what's going to happen after the season. And I don't know about you, but I'm just tired of it. I've seen enough over the years where this referendum on everything week to week with the Giants is hard to take. It really is. And I know I'm not speaking from a fan's perspective. I think in some ways I want to represent the fans from people I talk to. I've said this before, why I wear the K-12 hat for the guys, for Paul Wood, that was given to me. It's a sweet lid, number one, but also number two, I try to remind myself of the loyalty of the fan base and just the idea of our audience, the people who follow my coverage of the Giants for years, respect what I have to say. To me, I try to respect that, the reciprocal nature of loyalty and understanding and appreciation and respect. This week to week, we're going to the Hall of Fame. We're going to challenge for a playoff spot, to the next week of everybody deserves to be fired. Joe Shane, what has he done? He's done a terrible job. Brian Daboll's done a terrible job. Ownership. I can't believe I root for this team. Fans are allowed to be fans. But as I said a couple weeks ago, the line is blurred between fandom and reporting. And I think, what gets me sometimes is that, just because we try to be patient and appreciate the situation for what it is, doesn't necessarily mean, they're in the tank and they're not taking it seriously. And how are you defending these guys? The Giants are 1-4. There is no defending where they're at. Could they have been 2-3? Absolutely. Could they have been 3-2? Absolutely. The Cowboys game and the Saints game are games that they should have won. And I think Dallas and New Orleans will look at it and say there are games that they should have won, and they did. So moving forward now, going into Thursday night, my focus is not on the firing of Brian Daboll, Joe Shane needs to be fired, where we're going with the draft for next year. I actually had someone ask me a question on X that, do I regret, when am I going to admit that I was wrong for bringing these guys back this season? And I think there's this misconception about what's going on that, and I really do believe that going back to last year, if you felt as though Joe Shane and Brian Daboll should come back, and I did, and I still do, I still think it was the right move to bring them back. That doesn't necessarily mean that they get a lifetime contract here with the Giants. And this idea that that's what it was, I think is unfair to people who just try to play it straight and not scream and yell and not talk about where this franchise is and what they need to do. This is not easy. We knew going into the season that they had a brutal schedule. It's not an excuse. They need to compete. They need to make plays. They don't need to fumble the ball and throw interceptions and have guys stop running routes. You want to talk roster construction? We can talk roster construction. And you want to blame Joe Shane? Look, little Jordan Humphrey being on the roster last week would not have made a difference in New Orleans. Is the bigger picture important about roster construction? Yes, especially if it becomes a trend. So you can talk about what they believe as the roster in a game day situation, but the Giants not filling 2 spots on the active roster last week didn't lose them the game in New Orleans. Could it ultimately lose them a game down the road? Sure. It could happen, but I don't think they lost that game because Lil Jordan Humphrey was left home in New Jersey. Now, all that being said, you've got a Thursday night game at MetLife. Who knows what the situation and the crowd is going to be. You know, as before I came on to start the show, Paul Wood and I were talking, and, you know, I said ultimately everything does come back to Jaxson Dart. And there are a lot of layers to it, but every week is a learning week for Jaxson Dart. And if you go back to 2004, you know, Eli Manning, I think, was 0-6 before they won his final start against Dallas. Now, we didn't have social media back then. We didn't have podcasts. We didn't have fans doing podcasts. We didn't have beat writers who were doing podcasts. We didn't have daily shows that are talking constantly about the two extremes. It's either Jaxson Dart and Brian Daboll are a match made in heaven and the Giants got it right and everything they did off of that game against the Chargers, versus the New Orleans experience where Brian Daboll's got to go, look at his overall record, Jaxson Dart, maybe he's not that good, or we can get another coach that fits what Jaxson Dart needs and what he wants as a quarterback, and Joe Shane, and he hasn't built anything. I look at this season and I say, tell me where you are in January. And ultimately, that's what John Mara said at the end of last season. And we do get to a point where it's, who are you listening to? Who do you trust? Who do you want to actually hear what they have to say? Or do you just want to hear the people who shout the loudest? Because it'd be very easy for me to get on this show today and scream and yell and say, Brian Daboll needs to be fired. Let's talk about head coaching candidates, and Joe Shane needs to be fired. And let's talk about general manager candidates. And, you know, John Mara and the Mara family and the Tisch family need to sell this team. And where are the planes over MetLife? All that stuff is easy. It's low hanging fruit. It's very hard. Although while some of you believe, and some of my critics believe, that it's easy to just constantly gloss over. And that's what I've been accused of, glossing over. This is a week-to-week league. And do I think the Giants are going to win tomorrow night? No, I don't. I don't, because it's the worst case scenario for Philly, to face Philly, actually, in this situation. They gave up 18 points in the fourth quarter to Denver at home. Everybody's talking about how Philly is just not the same. And now the Giants have to go in there. No Darius Slayton. Told you that on Sunday after the game. Slayton with the hamstring injury. You have a hamstring on a regular week for a guy who uses speed the way Slayton does, and it's a problem. On a short week with no full practice, he's not getting out there. So we want to talk roster construction here. We said in the summer, the Giants in their receiving core behind Malik Neighbors was suspect. You had Darius Slayton and Wan'Dale Robinson, who you were counting on. You had really no veteran presence behind them. You had no young receivers other than an undrafted rookie in Bo Collins, who at this point is still developing. We saw that last week. His chemistry with Dart, he cut off the route. It ended up in Dart's second interception. So when you consider where this receiving core is, sure, if you want to criticize Joe Shane and Brian Dable and say they didn't build out their wide receiver room, but building out the wide receiver room was not a priority on this team. I mean, you won 3 games last year. You had a lot of other areas that you needed to build out, and it's not going to get done year to year. You know, should they have drafted a wide receiver at some point? Sure, if you liked one, if there was one to get. You know, for me, you know, I'm looking at the situation and saying, you got to do what you got to do, the best case scenario. And for the Giants, I remember in 2017 when they lost their top 3 wide receivers in a game against the Chargers. And then they went on the road and they were double-digit underdogs on a Sunday night to the Denver Broncos. And they ended up winning the game. Everybody thought Denver was a great team at the time. Denver ended up going in the tank and did not have a great year after that. But you're on a short week. You've got to reinvent yourself yet again offensively. I would expect little Jordan Humphrey to get called up now. He's going to get reps. You expect Bo Collins to not cut his route the way he did. You expect the Giants to do what they did early to success in New Orleans and use the tight ends the way they did. And all of a sudden, Daniel Bellinger is a 1-2 punch with Theo Johnson, and you need to run the football. Now, Tyrone Tracy, I thought, would definitely be playing on Thursday night. Listening to him yesterday, doesn't sound like he's convinced that he'll be back from that shoulder injury. We'll have to wait and see. I think the Giants expected Tracy to be back, or at least they wanted to give him a chance. But again, that's a tough situation. You have a shoulder injury. Did they miscalculate it? Did they say that we thought he'd be back and he's not back? We'll have to wait and see and how that plays out. But bringing up Turbo Miller, and you guys know Turbo Miller was on this show soon after he signed with the Giants. And so I have a good relationship with Turbo Miller. Turbo earned a roster spot in the summer with how he played, and there was intrigue. Now, he wasn't a complete running back. He's not a complete product, but I could see Turbo Miller being on this 53 and being a guy that if Scatterwoo is hurt and if Tracy is hurt and if Motor Singletary can't play, that you could turn to Turbo. But I'm not going to sit here and tell you. I think it's disingenuous to sit here and tell you that Turbo Miller being on the 53, just like little Jordan Humphrey, would have made the difference in New Orleans from a loss to a win. That's just not, it's not right. And everybody listening to the show knows that's not right. So let's talk a little bit about, as I mentioned in the open, it does come back to Jaxson Dart, and I was impressed Sunday with the accountability. I mean, the understanding to know that when you're the quarterback, all eyes are on you. And something that I've talked about before, when Eli Manning was here, I thought Daniel Jones was accountable when he was out there. I mean, he talked about it, but didn't truly take everything on his shoulders. Eli Manning, and I think people forget this, from a media perspective, if the Giants lost on Sundays, Eli Manning was available on Mondays. He made sure he talked to reporters, and he answered for all the things that went wrong on Sunday. Offense, defense, special teams, everything, because he was the leader of this team. When the Giants won on Sundays, Eli Manning was not available on Mondays because Eli Manning, in his mind, felt as though the wins belong to everybody. The losses belong to him. And I got that vibe from Jaxson Dart on Sunday. Still early, still very early. But Jaxson Dart has that kind of makeup. And you can just see when he talks at the podium, look, it's a learning experience for me. 22 years old. Don't judge me by my age. I'm not going to use my age as an excuse. But this was the first loss of his NFL career as a starter. So how does he adapt? And I asked Jaxson Dart about that. Now you're going into start number 3 against a veteran defensive coordinator in Vic Fangio with the Eagles. Now, the Eagles' personnel defensively is not as good as what they were last year. They lost some pieces. Obviously, Quinyon Mitchell is still a very good player. Cooper DeJean is a good player. Jalen Carter up front is a good player. Jordan Davis is playing well up front. But they don't have the pieces on the edge that they had last year. So what does that mean? Well, it means that they're going to attack Jaxson Dart for what they think he's going to do. They're going to attack him off of the offensive game plan from New Orleans and what he showed against the Chargers. Jaxson Dart and this Giants offense needs to evolve week to week. And now they're forced to evolve because they're really only going to have Wan'Dale Robinson, Bo Collins, Jalen Hyatt, Lil Jordan Humphrey at receiver. So what else do they do? Do they put Gunnar Olszewski into the offense? Do they look at Amir Smith-Marset? I'm taking a chance, and I'm still trying to figure out his contractual situation. But if I'm the Giants for the remainder of the season, I'm bringing Treylon Burks in. Now, I know Burks' first-round pick in Tennessee things did not go well. He had an ACL last year from October. Then he broke a collarbone in the summer. So I want to see where he is physically. But from a Giants perspective, 6'2", got good size, was a good player at Arkansas, has not lived up to his first-round billing in Tennessee. But he is the ideal candidate for the Giants to take a chance on and bring him in here. And yeah, it's going to take a couple weeks to get him going, to get him put in. That was the other thing. I brought up Isaiah Hodgins. He's on the practice squad in Pittsburgh. If you were on a short week, Hodgins is the guy you sign and say, you know what? You know this offense. You can be trusted and you can be an asset here. That's not a long-term solution for the Giants at receiver. You're not finding a long-term solution. I don't believe that they're going to go and trade for Chris Olave from New Orleans. Would New Orleans even trade Olave at this point? Rashid Shaheed, who I think is still running on that touchdown. Yes, we mentioned these guys. These are options. These are possibilities to sign or to trade for. But ultimately, they've got to decide where they're at. And is it worth making a play for a receiver who you're just going to have to give a big contract? Wan'Dale Robinson's contract is up. Will he be back this year, after this year? I'm not so sure. We have to see what the coaching staff looks like. We have to see what the front office looks like. A new general manager comes in here is not going to feel any loyalty to re-signing Wan'Dale Robinson. If Joe Schoen is back, Joe Schoen might not have any loyalty to Wan'Dale Robinson. Or the flip side, Wan'Dale Robinson might not have any loyalty to being a Giant. He may want to look elsewhere and say, you know what, I can go somewhere. His former coach, Liam Cohen, down in Jacksonville, is doing a great job as the head coach. Props, by the way, to the defensive coordinator in Jacksonville, Anthony Campanelli. Jersey guy, known him a long time, interviewed for the Giants defensive coordinator job a couple years ago. He worked under Vic Fangio, worked under Jim Harbaugh. Giants passed, didn't have enough experience, signed Shane Bowen. Anthony Campanelli will be a head coach in this league. We'll just keep that name in mind, because what they've done in Jacksonville, and we saw it on Monday night, it's an inspiring thing. That's where the Giants fan deserves to have those moments, deserves to be back in that situation where you go in every week thinking, you know what, we might see something special. I had this column that I wrote today on Abdul Carter, was at his locker yesterday. Grew up an Eagles fan, said back at the Combine, my fandom of the Eagles is done on draft night. That's why he and his father went to the Super Bowl in New Orleans, went to see it. It was his final game as an Eagles fan. And lo and behold, he ends up with the Giants. And Abdul wanted no business talking about his Eagle fandom yesterday. And that's understandable. But this idea, and I talked about this a couple weeks ago, the idea of expectations for Abdul Carter. Abdul Carter is exactly what we thought he was going to be. He's special. He has special talent. He's just not having the statistical impact or the production impact that you need to have. But that doesn't take away from the other stats outside of the box score, the analytical, the quarterback pressures, 22. That's more than twice the amount for any other rookie in the NFL. And I wrote about this, and I talked about the history of Giants pass rushers going all the way back to Carl Banks, and just the idea, of where things are. And I'm actually going to call it up again because I think it's worth talking about on the podcast, because I just don't think people are truly appreciating the history of some of these guys and the idea that, look, Abdul Carter hasn't come out of the gates getting sack after sack. But the reality is that, as Saquon Barkley said yesterday, he's really good. And sometimes the stats don't speak for how much disruption he's causing. And that's straight from Saquon Barkley. Now, I know there's the Penn State angle, but, he's still the defensive rookie of the year favorite. So I looked this up, minus Lawrence Taylor, because out of respect for the best defensive player in NFL history, I looked this up earlier this summer when I wrote a story on Abdul going into the season. Now, Michael Strahan was inactive for the first 5 games of his career with the Giants. Now, the younger fan doesn't remember that. Maybe even the older fan doesn't remember that. But Michael Strahan was inactive for 5 games. That means he did not play the first 5 weeks. So this week would be Michael Strahan's first NFL game. Abdul Carter already has 5 games under his belt. Strahan recorded his first sack October 17th, 1993, at home against the Eagles. Little symmetry there. Kind of cool if Abdul Carter got a sack tomorrow night. But Strahan made out pretty well, I think. Making the Hall of Fame, winning the Super Bowl, one of the greatest Giants of all time. I think he did okay. Osi Umenyiora, his first sack was the final game of his rookie season at home against Carolina in 2003. Justin Tuck, he had 17 tackles over his first 7 games. He had his first sack December 4th at home against the Cowboys in 2005. Both Umenyiora and Tuck ended up 2-time Super Bowl champions. Again, among the greatest Giants of all time. The both were in the top 30 for the Giants 100 last year that I put together, and they're in the Giants Ring of Honor. Jason Pierre-Paul had his first 2 sacks November 28th, 2010 against the Jaguars. If you want to go all the way back to 1984, Carl Banks, selected 3rd overall. Giants great, should be in the Hall of Fame. He didn't have a sack until he had a 2-sack game against the Falcons on October 14th, 1984. So right around this time frame, a week earlier, is where Abdul Carter is. And he has a half a sack from week 1. So just something to keep in mind when you're trying to talk about Abdul Carter and how good he is, and he's been a disappointment. I've heard that from people, and you guys are just covering it because of the hype. No, the hype matches what we're seeing on the field. And he's this close to having a breakthrough. I don't want to say breakout, breakthrough. And Thursday night would be the perfect time. It really would. Now, does that mean that all of a sudden the Giants would win the football game? Again, I said, I think the Eagles are too good and too seasoned to win the game. But maybe if they come out and they fumble the ball and they commit a turnover on 5 straight possessions like the Giants did in New Orleans, that kind of evens the playing field a little bit. If Saquon Barkley doesn't dominate on the ground with shades of, say, 2K from last year, maybe the Giants do have a chance. Maybe if they get their fans on their side early on in the game. And I think, we've got to just assess the game for what it is. And it does come back to Jaxson Dart. How could you not be excited about having a 22-year-old quarterback who shows the kind of attitude and leadership that you've desperately wanted here? And I think the best thing for me to say is everyone wants to know, is Brian Daboll done here? Are you going to fire Brian Daboll? Should the Giants fire Brian Daboll? I'm not firing Brian Daboll in week 6. There was a reason why I wanted Brian Daboll back here. I wanted him to have his handpicked quarterback, and I want to see him try to develop that quarterback. And I don't know what Jaxson Dart is going to be, but I know I want Jaxson Dart working with Brian Daboll and Mike Kafka and Shea Tierney and Chad Hall for the remainder of this season. The Giants aren't embarrassing themselves out there. Yeah, as a fan, you can be embarrassed. It sucks to see memes and jokes at your expense. But this isn't slapstick comedy. They're turning the ball over. They're making mistakes. It's not acceptable. But it's not reason to fire Brian Daboll in the second week of October. It's just not. It happened in 2017 with Ben McAdoo because of what happened in the locker room. You had guys not showing up after the bye week. You had players walking out and leaving the facility on days of practice. And then you had the whole botched benching of Eli Manning and that whole scenario. So if we get to that point with Brian Daboll, and it's at the point of needing to make a change, then you'd make that change. But I think at this point, if you're the Giants, you've got to suck it up. You've got to look at the younger players. You've got to trust in your coaching staff and say, you know what? We're going to get these players to have their moment at some point this year. They had no chance to beat the Chargers. No chance. No one gave them any chance to win. Chargers didn't play well. Defensive front got after it. Jaxson Dart made some plays, and all of a sudden the Giants beat the Chargers. It could happen in this league. The Giants are more than overdue in this division. So I'm not selling that to the all-in audience. I'm not telling you that the Giants are going to beat the Eagles tomorrow night. That would be foolish, and I'd lose my credibility. But these things do happen in the NFL. I mean, it happens. Jacksonville beat Kansas City the other night, on Monday night. Look what happened in Arizona, with Arizona and Tennessee. Tennessee up 21-6. I'm sorry, not Tennessee. Arizona was up 21-6 driving. We've seen the running back, Amari DiMarcado, and all the attention that got. Busts off a 70-yard touchdown run, but drops the ball before he gets in the end zone in celebration. So instead of it being 28-6, game over, it's 21-6 touchback, and Tennessee gets the ball. Then Tennessee throws an interception. Cam Ward threw an interception. But the defender on Arizona fumbles the ball. Then another defender from Arizona kicks it into the end zone, and Tennessee jumps on it for a touchdown. And then we see at the end of the game, Cam Ward makes a great throw to Calvin Ridley. They kick a field goal, and they win the game, and Cam Ward gets his first game and first win with the Titans. It shouldn't have happened. There's no way Arizona should have lost that game. So those are the things that I'm thinking about going into tomorrow night. Now, look, if you're going to bury the Giants because they have no wide receivers and you're going to put that on Joe Shane, they deserve the blame. They accept the blame. They are responsible. Joe Shane and Brian Daboll are responsible for this team, this roster, and everything that is put together. So if they don't win, and you don't see signs of improvement and progress, then it will cost them their jobs. But why the need to feel like you have to make that happen today? To make yourself feel better? To say, I told you so? You were wrong. You were wrong, Art. You should not have brought them back this year. For the reasons they came back, I like the draft that they had. I like the quarterback that they drafted and the progress that I've seen from him from when he got here till now. I want to see the progress from now until the end of the season before I'm willing to say it's not working. They need to go. And I understand the bigger picture. If you want to fire Brian Daboll just strictly on wins and losses and his record, and some of you will say, well, Art, come on. Why wouldn't you just fire a guy based on his record? That's what matters. Yeah, it does. But it also matters what the team looks like and what you're developing. And I'm not ready to cast Jaxson Dart aside and say, I need that pound of flesh. I need to fire Brian Daboll because I don't like him. He's not good at the podium. He doesn't give me what I like as a fan. He's, looks grumpy on the sideline. He doesn't talk about injuries. Remember, a lot of you who don't like that from Daboll would have hated Bill Parcells. But the memories of Bill Parcells are what erase that. It's the same thing with Bill Belichick. Everybody looks at Bill Belichick now and is like, oh, you can't get away with it if you're not winning. Well, yeah, but he got to a point where he was winning and developing. Now, I'm not saying that Brian Daboll is those guys, but I'm also saying that he's not the bumbling idiot that you're trying to make him out to be. Some of you are trying to make him out to be. It's week 6. You're 1-4. It's go time. Step up. Play better. Stop being undisciplined. Stop turning the ball over. It's okay to make some plays. And if you can make the plays and you win some of these games that people don't think you could win, Chargers, and you win some of the games that people expect you to win, the Cowboys game, the Saints game, then maybe the season takes on a different feel. But right now it doesn't. You're 1-4. That's the bottom line. And it's not going to be easy. And it's going to be harder before it gets any better. But we promise we will be all in, all over it, making sure that we tell you everything you need to know. Now, tomorrow night, Saquon's back. We know his documentary. I don't get anything out of watching Saquon's documentary on Amazon Prime to tell you again. Yeah, the Giants were made to look like fools last year because of how Saquon performed. That's it. We know they were. We know John Mara lost sleep. We know. You want to go back to when the Giants and retrace the steps of when the Giants decided to franchise tag Saquon Barkley and sign Daniel Jones, we've been through all of that. We know the rationale why they did it, and it backfired, and it didn't work for them. And it won't work for them until they actually start winning and showing improvement. And that falls on Brian Daboll and, to an extent, Joe Schoen. So that's where we're at. Now, the one last thing I thought was interesting from yesterday is Jaxson Dart talking about how Jalen Hurts is one of the quarterbacks that he emulates. He watched a lot of his tape when he met with Brian Daboll at the Combine and the Senior Bowl and started talking about quarterbacks that he likes. Hurts was one of them. So Jalen Hurts and Jaxson Dart on the field together tomorrow night will be interesting. We'll see where Hurts is at in terms of his passing game. We know A.J. Brown isn't happy. They have Brown and Smith. All that unhappiness, the Eagles are expected to just come out and put one on the Giants tomorrow night. And they might. They might. They're good enough. Giants just have to be better than what they were in New Orleans to have a chance. And I think that, to me, is really the most important thing from the New York Giants perspective. Go out there, show up, show some pride, make some plays, make this interesting tomorrow night. Make the Eagles sweat a little bit. Make them think about, maybe it's not as easy as what we thought it was going to be. It wasn't long ago that the Eagles, having a chance at winning the division, came to MetLife, and the Giants basically drilled them in the first half, forced them to put their starters on the bench. So maybe, just maybe. I mean, Saquon wasn't on the Eagles then, but maybe that's what you do tomorrow night. So for Paul Wood, we will be there tomorrow. We'll figure out what we're going to do as far as post-game tomorrow night, but we appreciate you being all in. And like I said, I mean that from the bottom of my heart in terms of loyalty. We appreciate everyone who watches this show, who listens, who follows all our coverage on NorthJersey.com. And we're here. We're not going anywhere. So 1-4, 4-1, that's tomorrow. Doesn't matter whether the Giants are that. I would like to cover a team again that has a chance to go to the playoffs. And, it's fun, but we don't get to pick and choose every week as to what the team is going to do. But I do promise you that I will be there and I will follow it. And I will tell you what you need to know. So for Paul Wood, I'm Art Stapleton. Appreciate you watching and listening. We'll be there Thursday night, and then we'll be back for a post-game show either after the game or on Friday, depending on time and everything that's going on at MetLife Stadium. So appreciate it, and we'll talk to you on Thursday.